if you follow the news closely, the Biden administration now suspended Iran envoy Robert Malley helped to fund and support and direct an Iranian intelligence operation designed to influence the US and allied governments, according to the reliable sources. Now, if you follow the show long enough, Iran is one of the critical countries that we've been talking about, especially related to internal nuclear weapon development and also this domestic political chaos. But now this time, since Biden administration has suspended this complete project and also find out that, get this, people who are involved in this project or people who are involved in this intelligent operation are actually belonging to the government on the US soil. And also, some of them even involved in this what we call academic field. This is very alarming. Remember, we're looking at a country that there's no human rights. And also we're looking at a country that the nuclear weapons and also the missiles and everything could actually potentially threaten not just the US but also with the world. So what is going on today with the whole suspension for Iran envoy Robert Malley? And also, what are the details that today are so alarming that we have to talk about it so that it could wake up the entire international community? Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor to invite our distinguished speaker. Again, you know Scott Morgan. Scott Morgan has been the president of Red Eagle Enterprises since its inception in November 2012. He uses his experiences from serving in the U.S. military to address various projects. And currently, he's based in Washington, D.C. Well, Scott, and welcome back to The Missing Piece.
Good morning, Will, and thank you for having me.
You know, Scott, I have to say that before having this conversation, everything I read about this report and also read about this incident, as I mentioned before, the word was not just alarming. I would say it was astonishing and surprising to know all the details. But I want to ask you the question right away. In the story that you and I will share together, it says, showing a group of Iranian American academics being recruited by the Iranian regime, meeting together in foreign countries to receive instructions from top regime officials and pledging their personal loyalty to the regime. Scott, you're the expert. Walk us through exactly what happened between the two countries and why this involved with an Iran envoy, Robert Malley. Go ahead.
That is an excellent question. We all know what the ultimate goal was. You know, most people assume that the goal was for Iran to acquire a nuclear weapon. But I would have to say that if one looks at the operations and the methods that they used and how they did it, I would say the goal of the mullahs in Tehran was actually to have the sanctions lifted by the United States and the other parties. Now, actually having the way they're going about this, you know, it's classic intelligence gathering. It's putting people, actually agents of influence, in key positions, having them try to promote the Iranian government in a positive light. It's, you know, in some ways it has been challenging, but in other ways, this does explain the focus, and I should not say focus. I should say it may show the explanation why the Biden administration, and to some extent the Obama administration, took several positions regarding the relations with Iran that actually did not make sense to those of us in the West, but. It's actually, you know, if confirmed, it's a well flat out strategy. Well played out, well crafted.
Well, Scott, but again, you know, you use the word strategy, but one thing, again, for most of us that we aren't familiar with Robert Malley, but again, according to the research, then Molly is also the former head of the International Crisis Group, which directly paid and credentialed several key members of the regime's influence operations. Now, help us with better understanding what went wrong exactly, and is this what we called an internal intelligent operation loophole? So in other words, how come that initially no one could actually spot this loophole, or what we call this mistake, until that recently the Biden administration suspended the entire project or suspend this envoy? What happened exactly?
There are a lot of people that were caught off guard when word came out when Mr. Malley had his security clearance revoked by the State Department. That was months before this report actually came out. And people were actually wondering why the clearance was revoked. Even Congress was even inquiring about what transpired to lead to this taking place. But there's a couple other things. Going back to an intelligence operation regarding the Middle East, it's not the first time an NGO has been accused of supporting one country, because, as you know, at one point Human Rights Watch was actually criticized for actually having their projects which investigated the situation between the Israelis and the Palestinians were actually funded by a Gulf state. That was, I believe, 15, 20 years ago, and that did not generate as much controversy as this has. But actually, going on to these people, there's one person in particular, Ariane Tapatari. She is a senior official within the U.S. Department of Defense. She's actually a chief of staff to one of the undersecretaries. Recently, over 30 Republican members of the U.S. Senate sent a letter to Secretary of State Austin inquiring about how she got her security clearance. At this time, the Pentagon sees no impetus to actually revoke her security clearance. When we talk about putting people in the right places to influence policy, this position is exactly what we're talking about. But also, if you notice, the International Crisis Group itself, some of their criticisms about this reporting, basically, it just seems it's been seen by some people as a deflection. Like, most people are saying, you're just saying this because you actually got caught doing something again. But going back to Mr. Malley, it's ironic to know that although he's no longer technically employed by the State Department, he's actually back in academia right now teaching.
Well, but Scott, let's continue to follow what you just shared with us. Again, for most of us that we don't work for the federal government and we have no information about the complication, or we even call it the simplicity, to get cleared before you can actually start your job in the federal government. But again, for someone like Robert Molly or even other people you mentioned previously, I guess the question is, how thorough or how trustworthy is the system today when we appoint someone specifically to the state government or even to this higher official or higher positions? Because I can imagine that if you, say, have a very complicated background, related to the previous history jobs or anything, it's rather challenging and difficult to get clarified. But right now, what is the process to be able to put the person on staff for this critical and essential position? Your thoughts, Scott?
Well, one of the reasons why it seems Mr. Malley went back into the government without any major challenges because he also served in a similar position under the Obama administration. So that probably cleared a lot of the hurdles, and the background checks may have been more perfunctory and not taking it seriously. But as you know, anybody who goes to a federal position, they actually go through a standard background check where some of the things is like where they look for factors that could put them in a position where they may actually do things like this, whether if they have any bad habits like gambling or drinking, what have you, if they have any outstanding debts, things of that nature will generally raise red flags. But as you know, the national security apparatus here in Washington also has a reputation for protecting their own. But that's just scraping the surface. But but ascertaining what exactly happened and what specifically Mr. Malley did to actually do this, because as you know, you've actually seen there are several think tanks and NGOs here, that have been rising to prominence again, and actually, have been taking a pro-Tehran position, saying that the U.S. should offer more incentives for Iran to actually, stop the nuclear weapons program, improve human rights, and rejoin the community of nations. But another thing that is telling also during this whole crisis, or should I say brouhaha, is there the reports that the UK, France, and Germany are planning to reimpose sanctions on Iran over the nuclear program. Well, some of this could be still a reaction over the horrific death of Masha, which occurred more than a year ago, and they thought that they gave the regime enough time to make amends to rectify the situation, but it appears that the regime still has not, and has actually launched a new wave of crackdowns on the 1 year anniversary of her death. So that's it. It's the case, that the Iranians actually have been able to have these agents of influence in key positions here in Washington. And the damage is potentially incalculable. It explains some of the poor decisions that the Biden administration has made, and to a lesser extent, what the previous Obama administration as well, because some of the same players were actually around the city then.
Scott, I want to move into a country of Iran. I know, again, within the story, there's a unique group. It's represented by the 4 letters. It's IRGC, but the full name is called Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps. Scott, help us with better understanding. Who are these, what we called Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, and what role do they play in a general sense, or particularly when it comes to this relationship between Iran and the U.S. today? Your thoughts?
Well, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the best way to describe it is a paramilitary group. It acts along the similar lines of the U.S. Joint Special Operations Command. They are an external actor. Three key places where the U.S. is in direct or indirect contact with the group in a military context are Iraq, Lebanon, and Syria. Their presence has been felt here in this hemisphere They're believed to have been also been participating in training exercises in both Venezuela and Nicaragua. Um, they actually have a bone to grind with the U.S., particularly after the Trump administration assassinated their leader, Soleimani, back in 2020. And everybody, and the consensus was that event set Iranian U.S. relations back.
I see that, Scott. Now, let's continue with our conversation. Again, going back to the story that you share with me, I want to bring up another name that may be something that you're the expert and you can help us with better understanding is what we call a spy network. Scott, I'm not American, but let me help you, or maybe you can help us to refresh a memory that last time when we talk about a spy network, it was in the early 1960s when former US President Robert Kennedy, or I'm sorry, John F. Kennedy, not Robert, John F. Kennedy, that tragically he was assassinated. And then the word spy network started to flow around the country to believe that, Oswald was a patsy and he was actually part of a spy network, or he was supposed to belong to a spy network to assassinate President Kennedy. But now, fast forward 2023, we're looking at a country, again, as you mentioned before, very much interested in developing nuclear weapons, very much interested in using missiles as a weapon to threaten international community. So what exactly the spy network today we're talking about? And also, is it still threatening, or even we say dangerous for the international community?
Yes. Yes to the second question. An organized network of individuals with one goal in mind, whether it's espionage, sabotage, or acting as agents of influence, which is what this group actually has done here in Washington, and in some cases Vienna as well, working with targeting the IAEA as well. So it's a small group. Do they often interact with each other? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. There's generally a control agent group, and he would report back to his superiors in Tehran. This is nothing new. This should be nothing new to most Americans or anybody else listening to this. During the Cold War, the Soviets did it all the time here in the United States. The United States and their allies also did it within the Soviet Union, and probably to an extent are still doing it also in China, although North Korea would probably be a difficult challenge, although due to how close nature of a society they are. It would probably make it a challenge to actually recruit people. But one of the things that is a key element is people that would be actually willing to do this, knowing that they're either willingly, or they could do this either willingly, knowing that they are supporting the effort of the Iranian government, or unwillingly, or they could be convinced that they're actually doing this for the goals of another country, where then it would actually be called a false flag operation. Although I do not see this as a false flag right now. This is just it appears to be a classic influence operation, which has had some results, because as you know, pro-Iranian elements have attacked U.S. positions in northeastern Syria, and northern Iraq over 80 times this year. The Biden administration has only retaliated 4 times. So although most people are actually focused on the nuclear deal, where where the Iran's trying to get the bomb and also trying to get sanctions lifted. These incidents in the Middle East involving the U.S. military and pro-Iranian elements attacking them, and the lack of a response by the Biden administration, I actually wonder why that has not been looked into as a potential activity by this group.
Scott, I want to end our conversation by asking a very simple question. Again, we're looking at there's a loophole, and again, there are issues with the intelligence operation today within the U.S. government. Now, on the other hand, we have to remind ourselves that Iran is a country that we need to deal with the country strategically to prevent any threat, particularly the nuclear weapon threats, and also the missile developing or testing. Again, we're looking at a similar case with North Korea. But let's bring the conversation back to you is, how much do you think that people today, especially the American citizen, can rely or can continue to trust this intelligence report or the intelligence service within the U.S. government? So in other words, if a country can place a mole inside the government, or if the country can place easily what we called, I want to be careful, spy network in the country, how concerned should the citizens be today when we're looking at the safety of the country? Your final thoughts.
That's actually a good question. As we know, some of the national security apparatus and within the country, whether it's the FBI or even in some cases the CIA and other NSA, decisions are now appear to be based on that, not on national security issues, but political concerns. Now is actually going to be, any action they take is going to be scrutinized, no matter if it benefits the country or not, or if they don't do anything, people are going to do. Concerns that the American people have right now is that the national security apparatus appears to be used politically in nature instead of national security interests. FBI does it domestically, so this appears to be a failure on their part. Office of DNI, and to a lesser extent, Homeland Security. Congress has been trying to hold oversight hearings about what have you. As soon as they have a new speaker and get the CR done, hopefully we'll see new hearings about what happened here, so they can find out what happened. I don't expect the White House to actually be a willing participant in this. American people, this is a case of once again is like, what are our interests? Because you're seeing elements of the national security apparatus seemingly working against the best interests of the U.S. people right now. So this is just another case. Kudos should be given to the person at the State Department who noticed this red flag and revoked the security clearance of Mr. Malley. So that person deserves a job well done.
Well, again, Scott, as we're looking at what's happening today in the U.S., and also we're looking at this political struggle, not just within the Democratic Party, and also right now, again, as you mentioned before, we're looking at this Republican Party, whether they can pull everything together. And also, we're looking at the future of the country. Of course, we say that foreign policy should never go away. And also, it's crucial that we need to pay attention and continue to follow the progress, what we made in terms of dealing with the country of Iran, North Korea, and any other sensitive members within the community.